The 50 Podcast.
50 Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the 50 Podcast. Today we are here with Amanda Dozanti, aka AK. She's a former law enforcement officer, and she's helping first responders break free from their mental health battle and beat the burnout. And I didn't even realize until this morning, but I feel like it was meant to be on this date because today, September 26th, is Law Enforcement Suicide Awareness Day. And I feel like it's awesome that I get to talk to you today. And I know that you've helped so many people in first responders and law enforcement. So I'm really excited to get to talk to you. And I think it's very special that it's on this actual day. So for our listeners who don't know who you are, give them a quick bio about yourself, and then after we will peel back the layers on all the things we talked about above and more. So you have the floor.
So, yeah, I'll just kind of like a bird's eye view. I started my law enforcement career at 19, did a couple of years of undercover online investigations. While I was getting my undergrad, I went through the academy, started my law enforcement career, at 19, but then I started like on road patrol and actually getting paid for it as a deputy sheriff right out of college. I did that for a few years. The bulk of my career was on afternoon shift on road patrol. And of course, we were understaffed, so we were high speed, low drag, just running all over the place. And that wasn't enough. So I had to, jump on Marine Patrol and pick up all the extra details and all of that stuff. 2015, I went from being Officer of the Year to a very crispy burnout. I was experiencing severe depression, suicidal ideation, PTS, and what I later was told was adrenal fatigue. So I made the very difficult choice to leave full-time law enforcement. I stayed on as a special and an auxiliary here and there for a little while. I really tried to hang on to it, but after I left full-time law enforcement, I became a criminal court victim advocate, and I dove into a master's degree in criminology and victimology, and that's where I started studying trauma, and all the pieces started to come together. And so then I also became a yoga instructor and went through all kinds of different classes and courses and trainings to try to heal myself. All of it seemed very disjointed until I got this like lightning bolt. I don't even know what you would call it, just like an epiphany, that I needed to put it all together and bring it back to first responders because they need this too. So the bulk of what I do now is I coach individuals. I do trainings and speeches all over the country. I have a free app called Lifesaver Academy. And I really just churn out a lot of social media content to bring awareness, to bring solution, and encourage people to get healthy because we only have one shot at this. So that's the overview.
When I was doing my research on you, because I stalk all my guests before they come on. I want to know everything about them. And you mentioned it in this bio, and I was going to mention it later, but I thought it was interesting how you went from Officer of the Year to then, explained here, and you had that somewhere where I read it somewhere. I think it was in your website on your bio. And then you went to that burnout right after. And I think it's interesting, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but like sometimes we don't know when people are struggling or feeling that burnout or that pressure or whatever it may be. And like you're Officer of the Year, and then right after that, you feel this stress or this pressure. It's just so interesting because sometimes it's like the strongest people or the most successful people, and you have no idea what's actually going on. Thank you for sharing, by the way. So for all of my guests that I have, I always ask them about their family life and growing up because I find it interesting to get kind of like the nitty-gritty background on everyone and how we kind of all got into law enforcement because our stories are so different. So tell us about your family life and how it was growing up.
So I was an only child. I grew up out in the middle of nowhere in southeastern Ohio, in Appalachia. And We like for the bulk of my childhood, I only had like 3 channels on the TV. Like it was just simple. My dad was a mechanic and a wildlife trapper. And my mom worked her way up from being like a secretary to being a financial advisor. My parents divorced when I was like 9 or 10. That just brought up something because I haven't talked about that in a long time. So I was alone a lot, and I, from that, became very resourceful and just did a lot of stuff on my own. I have no problem being alone, which is a double-edged sword for sure. And in my, wow, this is bringing up a lot. So I'll skip some of it because
but this is why I like to know because it's so interesting because everyone has such a it's true, everyone has such a different story because to enter law enforcement, I feel like we all have like some, maybe we know our reason, but sometimes we don't know until we like dive deeper into like our background.
And that's, yes, we all have something. And so one of my things is when I was 17 years old, my lifelong best friend, since we were in daycare together, since we were 4 years old, died by suicide. Wow. And that was something that, you know, at that age, I just didn't know how to deal with. Everybody was dealing with it. Everybody was just like completely mind blown. Like we didn't see it. Well, I think some people saw it coming, but so I didn't deal with it and I didn't process. And then 2 years later, I go into one of the most stressful kind of careers, right? One of the most stressful fields where you're just exposed to all of this human suffering. And it makes sense in hindsight that I had all this dysregulation in my system and this, I was drawn to this thing that gives you more of that because it felt familiar. So in hindsight, it makes a whole lot of sense, but it's, when you start diving into people's past, and that's a lot of what I do in my coaching is, you know, how did we even get here? We're not even talk about the work stuff for right now. We're gonna figure out who or how you got to be who you are.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting. Like I just like you. I like how you mentioned that you were okay, like being alone, but that is like a double-edged sword because I kind of feel the same for myself. I wasn't an only child. I was with 4. But I always joke to my parents, like, you should have stopped after me. I'm like, I would have been a great only child, but I feel like I actually kind of reclused because it was so chaotic. And I, now as an adult, now that I have the choice of being alone and not having the chaos all around me, I like when I'm not at work, I love like being by myself. It's just interesting. But okay, so we're going to get into your policing career. So it's very also interesting that you started so young. It's just wild to me because at my age, at that age when you started, there was no way I could have been a police officer. I would have probably not been qualified. So tell us, you mentioned some of your policing, but tell us about your background in policing and maybe some of the units that you worked in, and what was your favorite experience or role you had while in policing?
So the first couple of years was an auxiliary position. I had signed up to go shadow this agency that was doing undercover online investigations underneath the umbrella of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. So I went to shadow them and I was like, this is freaking bomb. I want more of this. I cannot believe, like, we got to get these people off the streets. Like, I was immediately like, what can I do? And so all of that was volunteer time. But I was chatting with pervs online. I was a decoy. I was doing controlled phone calls. Like, it was wild. And I was hooked at that point. And that gave me a lot of insight into investigations. And I was like, okay, I want to be a detective. And they were like, okay, well, you can't just jump to the middle of the ladder. Like you have to, you have to work your way up. You have to be, so I was like, cool, sign me up for the academy immediately. And so I had to, because of my age, I had to wait just a little bit to sign up, because after you graduate, you only have a certain amount of time before you get commissioned. So I went through the academy when I was 20, and then finally got sworn in at 21, which in hindsight is absolutely insane, because your prefrontal
so
cortex
young.
is not even completely developed until you're 25. I just did a training yesterday, and I said, how many people in here are under 25? And half of them raised their hands. And I'm like, okay, and it really is wild, because you're shaping so much of your brain in those years still. So then I went to the sheriff's office, and I did like prison transport and court security and like kind of all the steps to, I didn't do corrections. That was not one of the steps at that agency. But I did Marine patrol, which I really enjoyed, out on the boat. And honestly, I think my favorite position was just road patrol, afternoon shift, responding to calls. Because
so many people say the same thing, by the way. So many people. I think also reflecting back on your career too, it's like your most memories are like on road patrol with your like squad mates and like the funny things you see.
Right. And I think, and that makes sense too, because it's, when you're doing court security, you're doing prison transport, like it's all the same day in, day out. The excitement is in the nitty gritty. It's on road patrol. And that is, I think, you're right, where all of my good memories are, and where you get all that camaraderie. And it's so different. You never know, so it just feeds that part of you that is kind of like that adrenaline junkie. So that was by far like my favorite part of that piece of my career, for sure.
You're so young. I can't believe it. It's funny because I work with like a bunch of people too that are like, oh, I'm 23. I'm like, oh my God. Like, you should be having fun. You should be here.
Yeah. So when on social media, I've had a lot of people question me, because I'll say, I've been in and around law enforcement for 16 years.
And they're like, how you look
and they're
like you're 16. You're
lying. Let's fact check this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, let's fact check it. Like, let me pull up. I went through the academy when I was in 2008. I had already been doing law enforcement for a year and a half at that point. So, I was sworn, but I couldn't carry a gun at that point. I was still, auxiliary.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've had a lot of people question me on that. So it's wild how many people do start that young.
Yeah.
If they're like in explorer programs or doing a lot of ride-alongs, things like that, they're still getting the exposure to things that could have long-term impacts.
And you have to grow up really fast, especially in law enforcement. So you mentioned, and we'll get to all the stuff that you do for law enforcement now, but I guess we could target a specific time in your career, because my question was, what struggles have you faced in law enforcement? But I guess we could talk about after you were Officer of the Year, what happened after that where you felt like this burnout? Was it like pressure to be like so great, or what happened shortly after that?
So I think the burnout started before that.
Yeah,
for sure. It was like this slow burn that was happening. It was, there were little things that I just couldn't get it together. Like I was always squealing in the parking lot, 2 minutes till my shift. There were times where I couldn't even write the simplest of reports. Like it just they would just pile up because I couldn't get my brain to like write these sentences for like a lockout or an alarm drop or something stupid. There were times where I just couldn't even communicate that like I needed help with something. And so I would just white knuckle it and try to barrel through it. And I really struggled with time management and things like that. I was forgetting some of my gear at home, like how embarrassing. I had to go up to my sergeant and be like, oh, I left my weapon at home. Like, he's like, go get it now. Luckily, I lived really close. But things like that where it just had such a mental fog.
Yeah.
Those were things that I was noticing. And then off duty, I was drinking more. I was wanting to party. I was wanting to do all these things to kind of numb out the shame that I was feeling about not what I felt was like not doing a good job. It was probably like a year prior to getting the award for Officer of the Year. I had a really bad call that it was wild. I didn't know the outcome of it for a while. I actually write about it in my book. And that wore on me really significantly for 5-6 months until I knew the outcome of it, because it was literally life or death for the person that was in this accident. And having zero acknowledgement from my department about what I did, because I basically saved a mom and a baby. And there was zero acknowledgement for an entire year. That kind of wore on me. But it was everything piling up, and it just got really heavy and continuously more heavy and more heavy and more heavy. So it wasn't just that like few months. The few months was just what pushed me over the edge. There was so many years of backlog that I just hadn't dealt with.
It's so interesting because like as you're talking, it's like I am thinking about times where I've done the same thing, or like thinking of coworkers that I've seen like always be that person to rush in or forget something or have this combobulated sense of like, and it makes you think like, is that person kind of like struggling? Like I didn't even really think about it that way. Like they may have so much going on that like just getting to work on time is hard. And I never even really thought about it like that.
Yeah. And it creates this kind of this sense of shame, like, oh, I'm just a shitty employee, right? Like that's kind of the self-talk that we have, but not realizing that there's probably something inside that needs more attention. Like, for example, I wrecked my cruiser in a parking lot one night because I fell asleep behind the wheel because I wasn't sleeping, because I was working 7A to 2P on the boat and then 4P to 12A on the road and doing that 2 and 3 days in a row, and nobody was monitoring it. But I was like, I'm a machine, right? I'm just going to keep going. And all the overtime, I wasn't sleeping right.
Wow.
What a liability, and we like to think like, oh, what a flex. I can come in here on 2 hours of sleep and, be rock solid. No, you're not rock solid. You're a liability. Ask me how I know. So,
no, it's true. Yeah. It's like I can just go to work and pretend and get through this shift. But like if you're distracted, you are a liability to yourself and to other officers and people that you're potentially trying to help. So was it a combination of things, or was there a significant incident, and maybe it's the one that you kind of just talked about, but that made you decide like, I'm going to help others who are in this field with like their mental health and their burnout?
I don't know that there was any kind of specific incident that triggered the transition, because it happened over several years. In hindsight, what had to happen was I had to help myself first. Yeah. And I think so many people are really quick to say, I'm struggling, but I'm making it through, so I'm going to help everybody else. And it's like, why don't you give yourself a little more time? Why don't we really get solid and know the landscape first, before we jump in and try to drag everybody else? Because you're not, a lot of times we're not quite there yet. And I'm very grateful that I took the time, I took the years to heal myself, to get rock solid where I am now, to then be able to go back and help everybody. So it was a lot of soul searching, a lot of deep diving to realize that, like, okay, everything I used to heal, I can bring back to everybody else. So it wasn't always the goal. It was kind of paved for me. And then it was like, well, duh, I can't not do this now that I have all of this information. So I don't think it was any kind of one incident. It was just how it all played out. The dominoes fell in that direction.
And I'm a little curious about your schooling. Did you do that while you were still an officer, or was it after?
I was working full-time as a criminal court victim advocate.
Okay.
Then I went back and got my during that time, I went back and got my master's, and then I did a 10-month yoga teacher training during that time as well. Interestingly, I was doing all of that.
So you're still piling on yourself.
Exactly. Planning a wedding, getting all these other certifications. I even went as far as to become a Reiki master. What I realized was that my nervous system never stopped.
Yeah.
It just looked different. And so that's the key. It's not the environment, it's the internal environment. It's what we are seeking as humans. So even though I wasn't, on patrol and answering calls all the time, my nervous system was still like, hey, how much more can we pile on? And that is what leads to burnout. It's the attachment and the addiction to the stress and to the dopamine and all of those things. That's what leads to burnout. And that's what I'm trying to get people to realize, is that you have to slow down. You have to change your expectation of how much you can take on at once, because we are in this massive hustle culture, and extraordinary is great, but it is not the standard. We don't have to be extraordinary every second of every day. We're already extraordinary just by being a first responder. Like, give yourself some leeway or you will burn out.
I feel like I'm on my way to the burnouts too. So you are passionate about helping first responders recalibrate their lives. And you are also a voice. And I watched a lot of your videos, and you do a lot of public speaking. And I also love that you go to departments and agencies and speak to officers. And I'm going to speak to my agency and ask if you can come too, because my agency could definitely use you. But no, I really am. I'm going to send them your info.
I love that.
Yeah. So how did you get into like the public speaking of it all? Like, when did you decide, like, I'm going to start making videos and like, I'm going to put myself out there? Cause I know it's not easy. And like, maybe tell us about how it felt when you maybe booked your first public speaking engagement, because I know it's a big deal, and I kind of am interested as how that all evolved for you.
Sure. Yeah. So I initially just started making content on like Instagram and Facebook, and I was doing some informational graphics and things like that. And people really seemed to like them. And then somebody's like, you should get on TikTok. And I was like, I don't want to get on TikTok. That's so silly. So I begrudgingly was like, whatever. So I got on there and I made a couple of videos, and I didn't have any expectation. And I think that was the key, that I had no emotional investment in the outcome of it. And I just got on there and started talking, and it blew up. And so then I just continued to talk, and I'm still talking. And I had some people locally that were like, would you come to our department? It was a fire department, and talk about suicide awareness and prevention. Would you talk about like stress management and this? And I was like, heck yeah. So I created a PowerPoint or a couple of PowerPoints. And from there, I posted that I did that, and other places were like, hey, we would like you to come too. And so it just continued and it grew. Now I do trainings, like the in-service training kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I also do like speaking engagements, like keynotes and stuff like that now too. And I think that putting my face and my voice out there, it hits
That's a big
people different.
decision.
It resonates. Yeah. And it was kind of scary because, when we're in law enforcement, we tend to want to hide from the public, right? Because, the general attitude toward law enforcement isn't all that great these days. But I'm not in it anymore. And so I think that I feel a little bit safer. But I will say I had a professor, I was just in New Hampshire last week at the New England College. And this professor was like, I love your content. And I was like, really? Because sometimes I feel like it won't resonate because I'm just, here in my office or I'm in my kitchen making a video. And he's like, no, that's what we need. That's refreshing. It's real. We don't need people in suits and being stuffy. We
Totally
need to hear it from people that are just going about their everyday life. And I'm like, well, that's me. So it all by accident, my TikTok blew up and it just continued from there.
Yeah. I think I found you on TikTok first. I think that's how I originally found you. And I totally agree. I think, first of all, you're super relatable and like you're honest and you're funny and you're just normal. Like, like it's not like the guy said, like you're not being all stuffy and like watching it is like talking to a friend. I think that's the best way to describe it. It's like when you watch your content, it's like you're talking to someone that you've met before, like someone comfortable. And I think that's why it resonates with a lot of people because you have like this relatability, right? And then also because you've been in the profession, because there have been like, for instance, in Chicago, she was great. So I don't want to like diss on her, but like a lot of the people that we had as like our mental health helpers or whatever, EAP people, they had never been in law enforcement. And so sometimes you're sitting there and you're just like, when you had to talk to them and you're just kind of like, you don't understand. Like, you don't get it.
Yeah.
And I respect you for trying and like being here for me, but like, you don't get it, So I think it's important for people who speak on mental health for law enforcement to have been in law enforcement. Because if you haven't, you just don't get it.
So I hear that all the time. And I know a lot of clinicians who are fantastic and I feel comfortable going to them or, I feel comfortable sending people to them because they are well integrated into the culture and they get it. But it's kind of like being a parent or not being a parent. Like until you have kids,
100%,
you're not really gonna get it. So until you've been in law enforcement, you're not really like you didn't experience it firsthand. And it's there is a difference there. And I think a lot of people I try to get people kind of away from this like us and them mindset. Like some people get it and some people don't. Because those clinicians are there to help you dig deeper beyond the uniform. Mm-hmm. But it does help to talk to peers and people who have actually been there. So I see both sides of it.
Yeah. And I have had therapy personally myself. I never had therapy in my life. I started after I lost a friend in the line of duty. And every phone call I got, my heart dropped. If it was like a random phone call if it wasn't like a phone call I was expecting. And I was like, okay, I need to talk to somebody. And my therapist was great. Don't get me wrong. But if I would have sat down with the therapist who like on the first day would have said, by the way, I did 15 years in law enforcement. I know exactly, like, I think the trajectory of it would have been different. So I totally think what you're doing is so important and so valuable. So you started the Lifesaver Academy. Can you tell us about the courses and the coaching in the Lifesaver Academy and how you started it and who's a good fit for the program?
So there's a 9-week course on there. There are some things on the app. I'm just going to be totally transparent. There's some things on the app that need updated. And I'm in the process of doing that. Anybody, I think, that is a first responder that's starting to feel the burn, right? They're starting to feel like things are maybe slowly falling apart, or they're just feeling really strained or overwhelmed or disconnected. They're a great fit for going through this course. I will say, after the first of the year, I'm creating a group coaching membership. It's in the works now, but I have to finish my book first. So I have all these things that are playing out all at the same time. But what I'm finding is when people see that there's a course, they think, oh my gosh, more work. And that's like the last thing you need if you're burning out. So what you need is more connection, more just relatable, practical guidance. And so there's going to be this group coaching thing, and it's going to be a weekly call. People will be able to submit questions and then hopefully have like some laser seat coaching each week. So that's coming up, but there are a lot of free resources on the app. There are some meditations and breathwork exercises that are free on there to try, to start to kind of recalibrate your nervous system. Things that you can grab. There's an SOS tab on there. So if you're feeling like really elevated, right there in your pocket on the app, click on it, and like it's me on the other end, a little video of me walking you through a 2-minute breathing exercise to bring it back down, find that pocket of time to reset, so that you can, be ready for the next call or be ready to walk in the door when you come home or whatever the case is. So I'm not big on selling the course anymore, but it's there. And the membership is coming. And then there's a lot of really good free stuff on there as well.
I love that you said like you can just take a breather before your next call, because that's so true. Like sometimes you just need to take that breath before you just finish your call and you're going to your next one, and sometimes you just need to regulate yourself. So what do you think is contributing to the mental health issues we are facing today in law enforcement?
That is a loaded question, my friend.
Question.
So many things. So many things.
I could ask you this. This is the following question, so maybe this will help. Because with your burnout, all the stuff you do to help. So what do you think is contributing to mental health issues we are facing today? And is there anything officers can do daily to help them prevent the burnout? So maybe it's that breathing or whatever, but maybe you can give us some insight for people maybe who are hesitant to reach out to you just yet, but what's something that they can do daily to help them?
Well, I think it's important to understand like what the components of burnout are. So when you're talking about like categorizing it, right, versus categorizing depression or anxiety, or like we're not diagnosing, but we're just to look at them in general terms. So it's like the mental, emotional, physical exhaustion, the cynicism or cynical attitude, so that's like a psychological distancing. So that dark humor or
100%.
You get this. I think compassion fatigue falls under that as well, where you're kind of like, oh, I don't have time for these people's
writing this down because that's a good one.
Right? Like you just
that's
no
so
longer
true.
have any tolerance for the petty stuff. And then this sense of like not really making a difference, just not seeing that you're making a dent in anything. So it goes into, you're constantly making the same arrests. You're going to the same houses. The prosecutors aren't doing anything. You're just not feeling any progress in that area. So those three things, the exhaustion, the cynicism, and the personal efficacy. And my first thing that I like to hit is the exhaustion, because if you try to start working on the cynicism or the personal efficacy and you're still exhausted, you're not going to have the brain capacity for it. So I like to focus on the basics of the basics, like control the controllables and focus on your physical health. So eating right, not eating a bunch of crap, not eating a bunch of sugar, not a crap ton of caffeine, although, I mean, I am...
Me too.
Cheers. I mean, but not drinking 2 pots of coffee a day, right?
Yeah.
Not drinking. My God, get those Monster Energy drinks. Right. Get rid of the Monster Energy drinks. They're so bad. The alcohol, the nicotine, all these things. Make sure you're drinking water. I know people like roll their eyes when I say these very basic things, but when you think about what's happening, when your body goes into an adrenaline dump or a stress response, you're releasing adrenaline, you're releasing cortisol into your system. If you are not flushing it out of your system, where's it going?
Yeah.
It's still circulating in your body, and it's making you more susceptible. It's to another stress response. It's making you less tolerant of the next thing that's coming your way. So working on the exhaustion, focusing on sleep hygiene is huge. Making sure that you are getting good, restful sleep. I actually just did a TikTok about that yesterday.
I'll have to share.
And
that's a good one.
So I'm talking very basics, because if you can't get your body and your mind speaking the same language, and you can't get your nervous system regulated, then you're not going to be able to have the mental space for the other stuff. Eating more protein helps you to regulate your blood sugar, which helps you to regulate mood and all of the other things in your body. But beyond that, breathing exercises are great. If you can start even very slowly a meditation practice, there's so much science behind what that does to your brain. It is so incredibly helpful, even if you can just do 3 or 4 minutes a day and then build on that. I have lots of those things on my app. There are other apps that are great for it. There's YouTube. I think just very basics in the beginning. Okay. If that answers your question. I can literally, I have hours long courses on this, so I can.
No, it totally does. And I think like if anyone's listening who can relate to this, like I think even just visiting your page as a first step and watching some of your videos, because they're not long, like the videos you have just on your page, like check them out. And like, I think that's even a good start. Like if someone's drawn to your page and watching your videos and they can relate, like, it's time to like take a look at yourself and like think like, what do I need to do to slow down? So you've written books, written.
Yes,
you're writing a book.
I'm finishing my first book. It's almost done. It's so close.
Yes. You want to tell us about it, or do you not? If you don't want to, it's okay. I don't know if it's a secret.
It's not a secret, but it's I did keep it under wraps for a while because I had a lot going on in my personal life. We moved, and then like literally the next morning I had my second child. So
oh my gosh,
life was crazy for a minute. So but I'm close to the end now. So it's Beat the Burnout. We haven't decided on a subtitle yet, but it is prevention and recovery strategies for first responder burnout. And I'm so proud of it. It has a ton of information that is well researched, and it has some of my story interwoven as a cautionary tale and for entertainment purposes, of course.
I'm really proud of you. I mean, this is amazing. And I also think that, like,
Thank you.
if you can't go to the department and speak, maybe departments should give out your book, when it's ready. Because it's so important that we don't talk about mental health at work at all. Ever,
And truly, I think, when you talk about depression and anxiety and PTS, people kind of tend to shy away from that. Like, ooh, that's a diagnosis. Those things are, we don't want to talk about that. But when you talk about burnout and people are like, oh, well, everybody's burned out. It's like, yeah, let's fix it. It's fixable. And it's equal parts the individual and equal parts the organization, because it is an occupational phenomenon. The World Health Organization has deemed it an occupational phenomenon.
Yeah.
And so there are those three categories that I mentioned, the exhaustion, cynicism, and the personal efficacy on the individual side. But on the organizational side, it's workload, reward, community, values, fairness, and I'm going to forget the other one, control. And so those things need to be balanced in any organization. Otherwise, you're putting your people at risk for burnout. And that is a lot of, what I go into in the book. And I think my goal there is to bring awareness to these things, and then maybe we will have better employee retention. And when we have better employee retention, we will have better recruitment. And maybe, just maybe, we can fix this problem that we've got going on in America right now. So I'm sure it's not going to fix everything, but exactly. And it's so important. And I don't see anybody else honing in on the solution, right? Like, it's not more funding, it's the culture. And so let's find some solutions here. And so that's what I did. I did a lot of deep diving. I mean, I can show you right here. Here's my stack of library books.
I love it.
Yeah. Like that's
You're
my goal.
passionate about it.
For sure. That's an understatement.
Yeah. Well, what can we expect from you in the future? And do you have any final takeaways you can leave my listeners with? Because it doesn't seem like you're slowing down. You're definitely, but you're passionate about it and it's making you happy, which is important. And you're helping us, so thank you.
Well, so here's the thing. I have said no to a lot of things because I know my potential for another burnout, and that I'm not letting that happen. I now have the tools to prevent that. So I am trying very hard to pace myself. So what you can expect from me in the immediate future is this group coaching thing. I'm very excited about that. Obviously, the book is going to drop here in the next couple of months. Long term, I intend to do my own research, and that'll probably be wrapped up in a PhD, but that's just my own stuff. I intend to take all of what I have learned so far, and sometime in the next few years, I will be creating a team to go out and help agencies and their internal culture to work on their employee retention and their burnout rates. So that's something, this is the first time and probably the only time I will say that publicly until it happens. So that is in the future, but everything else, I don't know. The pavers just keep getting put out in front of me, and I'm picking which one to step on next. And so we'll see. But those are the things I know for sure.
I think that we could definitely use you. Like, I'm just a road patrol officer, and I could tell you right now that retention rates, is not good. And because there are so many young people, it's always, well, I can leave now and go to the next best thing, next best paying agency, if I'm not getting treated the way I want to be treated here. So it's definitely something that's necessary, needed, everything you're doing. So I really appreciate you. If someone's listening, where can they find you online? What's your, give us your plugs.
Well, I want to go back for a second. You're
Okay,
not
yes.
just a road patrol officer.
Oh, thank you.
That, like, in and of itself is very, very important. And I know that we see ourselves in that role as one of many, but every single day you have, and anybody else that's listening that thinks that they're just a road patrol officer, every single day you have an opportunity to be a part of somebody's story and change the trajectory of their life potentially. And so don't ever discount the value that that brings to somebody's life. So I just wanted to say that before
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
But yeah, if somebody's looking for me, AK Dozanti, so AK Dozanti, that's my handle on TikTok and Instagram. I'm on Facebook as Lifesaver Academy with AK Dozanti. I'm on LinkedIn. And then my website is just akdozanti.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I definitely think, I'm so excited to connect with you. And I actually really hope in the future we can connect again, and, maybe I can help with some of the projects that you're doing in the future. I'm definitely very interested in helping. But thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Stay safe.